If you're over 60, you already know retirement isn't a finish line. It's a doorway. And what you carry through that doorway can either weigh you down or lift you up. Now, here's the quiet truth. Most people don't ruin their retirement with one big mistake. It's not some catastrophic investment or one wild purchase that throws it all off. No, it's usually quieter than that. Subtle, habitual. It's in the small choices made over and over again without noticing, like a slow leak in a tire you don't realize is there until the car begins to drift. I've spoken to so many good people who worked hard, saved diligently, did everything right. And yet, somehow, they feel stuck, afraid to spend, afraid to rest, living in a house full of memories but still budgeting like it's 1,995. So what went wrong? That's what we're going to explore today. 7 financial habits that don't scream disaster, but quietly rob you of the peace, joy, and freedom that retirement is supposed to bring. And by the time we get to the last one, you might just realize you've been living with a belief that's never been yours to carry. Stick with me. This one might just change the way you look at your golden years and your money for good. Let me ask you something, and be honest with yourself. When was the last time you spent money without guilt? Not on bills, not on prescriptions, not on something practical. I'm talking about money spent on something that made your eyes light up. A grandchild's birthday adventure, a weekend by the water, a chair that fits your back just right, something that made you feel alive again. Too often, we grow up learning how to earn and how to save, but rarely are we taught how to enjoy what we've earned. Especially in retirement, that pattern sticks. You live through decades of just in case, and now, even when the storm has passed, you're still carrying an umbrella. But let's be clear. This season of life wasn't meant to be survived. It was meant to be lived, fully, freely, and with wisdom. Not worry, at the wheel. You've already sacrificed, already waited, already worked. Now, it's time to ask yourself, what if the habits that once protected me are now the very things holding me back? This isn't about recklessness. It's about release. It's about identifying what's quietly draining your joy so we can start reclaiming it, one shift at a time. Here's the real challenge, and it's one I've seen over and over again, sitting across from people in their 60s, 70s, and 80s. They've done everything right. They worked for decades, paid off their home, put their kids through school, showed up every single day. They've got the retirement account, the Medicare card, the stack of financial statements tucked into the drawer. And yet, they don't feel free. Instead, they feel anxious, paralyzed even, not because they're reckless with money, but because they've never been taught what it means to feel safe enough to use it. Somewhere along the way, security became scarcity, wisdom became worry, and spending became a silent sin. That's what makes this conversation so important. Most financial advice stops at save more and spend less. But what about after the saving is done? What about the quiet beliefs you carry into retirement that keep you in survival mode long after the need to survive is gone? Because here's what's true. Money habits don't retire just because you do. They follow you. And left unexamined, they shape how you live out the most sacred years of your life. This isn't about shaming old decisions. It's about seeing them clearly, so they don't steal what you've spent a lifetime building. Because retirement is not a punishment for aging. It is a reward for endurance. And if we don't take a closer look at the hidden habits that quietly unravel that reward, we risk waking up one day surrounded by comfort, but unable to truly feel it. So, let's bring these habits into the light gently, honestly, without judgment. You've earned that clarity. Let's begin. Now, before we name these habits, I want you to take a breath with me. A real one. In and out. This conversation isn't about fear. It's not about fixing you or pointing fingers. It's about freeing you from patterns you may not even realize are still driving the bus. Because here's something I've learned after years of walking with people in this chapter of life. What sabotages retirement isn't usually math. It's mindset. It's the silent beliefs we inherit from the past that whisper in the back of our minds things like, "Don't touch that money. You might need it later. Be careful. Don't get too comfortable." Do you recognize that voice? It's not bad. It's not wrong. It was formed in a different time, maybe when money was tight, or you were raising kids, or you watched your parents struggle. That voice got you through. But the question now is it still serving you? Because here's the thing. Every habit, even financial ones, begins with a story. And sometimes the story is outdated. Imagine this with me. A woman, 68 years old, divorced for over a decade, finally retired after teaching elementary school for 35 years. She has no debt, a modest pension, a house full of light and books. And yet, every time she walks past the bakery she loves, she looks in the window and keeps walking. Why? Not because she's broke, but because somewhere inside, she still hears her mother's voice from 1958. We don't buy what we can bake. That's how habits linger, not just in the budget, but in the bones. So I want to invite you to look at the habits we're about to talk through, not as mistakes, but as echoes of a time when you had to be in survival mode. Echoes that may still be running the show long after the danger has passed. And make no mistake, the damage these habits do is not always loud. They don't drain your accounts in a day. They drain your joy in slow motion. They rob you of spontaneity, of generosity, of simple delights. They replace confidence with doubt and planning with paralysis. And most dangerously, they convince you that you're just being careful, when in reality, you might be quietly living afraid. So today, we're going to expose them gently, one by one. And with each habit, we'll walk through the reason why this habit forms in the first place, the impact, how it quietly steals peace, time, or joy, the shift, what to do instead, in a way that feels empowering and safe, the reflection, a gentle question to ask yourself, because transformation doesn't come from pressure, it comes from presence. And I want you to listen not just with your mind, but with your heart. Maybe you'll recognize all 7, maybe just 1 or 2. But whatever you hear, let it be a mirror, not a measuring stick. A mirror that reflects not where you failed, but where you're ready to begin again, wiser and lighter than before. Because retirement isn't a retreat, it's a realignment. It's not the end of your usefulness. It's the beginning of your usefulness to yourself, to the dreams you put on hold, to the voice you silenced so many years ago, to the simple, sacred truth that you matter, even when you're no longer producing for others. So, let's begin with the first quiet habit. It's the one I see most often, and it's so common, people don't even question it anymore. But it might be costing you more than you think. Let's talk about habit number 1, the fear of spend even when the numbers say you're okay. Habit 1, the fear of spending. You've done the work. You've saved for decades. You've followed the plan, made the sacrifices, balanced the checkbook, and now, here you are retired, or nearly there with enough cushion to live. Not extravagantly perhaps, but safely, comfortably. And yet, every time you go to swipe the card for something non-essential, something that feels like joy instead of duty, your stomach tightens. A voice rises up. Should I be spending this? What if I need it later? That's the fear of spending, and it's one of the most common, most crippling habits I see in retirement. The reason? This fear doesn't come out of nowhere. It's rooted in real experiences. Maybe you went through hard times, a layoff, a medical bill, a market crash. Maybe you watched your parents struggle, or you grew up hearing phrases like, "Money doesn't grow on trees," or "We can't afford that." So you became careful, wise. You saved and saved and saved, and that got you here. But the mind doesn't always know when the war is over. It's still trying to protect you from a scarcity that no longer exists. That's what unexamined fear does. It tricks you into thinking you're still in danger, even in seasons of abundance. The impact. And the result? You live in a kind of prison with an open door. You have enough to enjoy life, but you don't feel free to live it. You hesitate to take the trip, buy the better mattress, join the club that brings you joy. I've watched people in their 70s skip birthdays, delay surgeries, deny themselves fresh flowers for the tabloid because they couldn't afford it, but because they didn't believe they were allowed to enjoy what they had worked for. And the tragedy? They die with full bank accounts and empty calendars. A life half lived in the name of responsibility. The solution. Here's a new story to consider. What if your money is not a shield, but a bridge? What if it's not just meant to keep the bad away, but to let the good in? You don't need to be reckless. This isn't about throwing caution to the wind. It's about balance, about recognizing that spending money on joy, connection, and experiences isn't wasteful. It's sacred. Try this. The next time you feel guilty for buying something that brings you genuine pleasure, pause and ask yourself, if I had just 1 year left, would I still say no? If the answer is no, maybe the habit isn't wise caution. Maybe it's outdated fear, dressed up as discipline. You've earned the right to spend from a place of peace, not panic. So talk to a trusted advisor, map out your essentials, and then give yourself permission to live, not someday now. The shift. Here's your thought-provoking reflection. What if your greatest act of gratitude for a life well lived is to finally start enjoying it? Sit with that. Let it settle. And when you're ready, we'll move on to habit 2, one that often hides beneath the surface of generosity and leaves you emotionally and financially drained. Habit 2. Over. Giving to adult children. Let's talk about love. You love your children. You would do anything for them. And if you're like many people stepping into retirement, you've already done everything, paid for school, bailed them out, let them move back in, maybe even co-signed a loan when no one else would. But here's the habit that quietly ruins peace in retirement. Overgiving to adult children at the cost of your own security. The reason? You don't do it because you're foolish. You do it because you're kind. Because somewhere deep in your heart, there's a story that says, if I don't help, who will? Maybe your parents didn't help you, and you swore you'd do things differently. Or maybe they did help you, and this feels like passing it on. But here's the truth. Very few will say out loud. Sometimes helping becomes enabling. And sometimes love becomes a burden we disguise as generosity. Especially in this modern world, where housing is expensive, jobs feel uncertain, and every child seems to be facing a mountain. You want to rescue them. Of course you do. That's what love has always looked like. But here's the hard truth. Your retirement cannot be the backup plan for every financial emergency in your children's lives. The impact. You stop taking care of yourself. You stop making decisions based on your own needs and desires. You say no to that dental appointment because your grandson needed new tires. You skip a vacation because your daughter's rent came up short. Again. And over time, resentment builds quietly. Not because you don't love them, but because somewhere along the way, you stopped loving yourself with the same urgency. You were supposed to retire with peace, not into pressure. And if you're not careful, you may find yourself in your 80s, short on funds and full of regret, not for loving too much, but for not creating healthy boundaries around that love. The solution. Boundaries are not barriers, they are bridges. They teach your children that your love is unwavering, but your resources are finite. They teach you that it's okay to say, I want to help you succeed, but not at the cost of my future. Here's a gentle starting point. Have the conversation. Sit down and say, I've always wanted to support you, and I still do. But I also have to honor the life I'm stepping into. I'm learning how to live within my means, and I need your understanding. It won't be easy, but it will be worth it. You can still be generous, just not at the expense of your own peace. That might look like setting a yearly gift budget, or helping with advice and mentorship instead of money, or saying not this time and knowing that's okay. The shift. Here's your reflection. What if your greatest gift to your children isn't your wallet? But your example? What if showing them how to live wisely, with dignity and boundaries, is the legacy they need most? It's time to release the silent belief that says, love equals sacrifice without end. Because love has limits and wisdom, honors both the giver and the gift. When you're ready, we'll move into habit 3, a sneaky one that often hides behind staying informed, but slowly eats away at your peace of mind. Habit 3, consuming financial fear daily, aka doom scrolling the economy. Let me paint a familiar picture. You wake up, pour your coffee, and open your phone or flip on the TV. And there it is again. The market's down. Inflation's up. Banks are shaky. Recession rumors swirl like a storm on the horizon. So you sit there, heart racing, thinking, should I move my money? Should I cancel the trip? Should I be doing more or less? This is what I call financial fear fatigue, and it's fueled by the habit of doom scrolling the economy. The reason? You were raised to stay informed, to be responsible. You probably lived through at least 2 recessions, a housing crisis, maybe even lost money in 2008. So now, staying tuned in feels like a kind of safety net. But what no one tells you is that fear has an appetite. The more you feed it, the bigger it grows. And the financial media? It's designed to feed that fear. Headlines aren't meant to give you peace. They're meant to keep your eyes glued. Crisis sells. Drama keeps you scrolling. And if you're not careful, you begin your day not with a plan but with panic. The impact. This daily consumption of worry has a cost. It clouds your judgment. It keeps you second-guessing every decision. You find yourself hoarding cash, avoiding purchases, delaying joy not because you can't afford it, but because the world might end next Tuesday. You become reactive instead of reflective. And over time, this fear-based mindset robs you of the very thing you worked for your whole life. Freedom. The ability to live instead of constantly bracing for the next blow. The solution. Let's be clear, it's okay to stay informed, but you don't need a 24-hour anxiety drip to do it. Try setting boundaries around your information intake. Limit yourself to 15 minutes of trusted financial news a day, preferably in the late morning, not first thing. Avoid sensationalist headlines. And skip anything that sounds like this. You must act now before it's too late. Talk to a professional, not a YouTube comment section. Build a simple, sound financial plan that gives you peace, and stick to it, even when the world gets noisy. And most importantly, reconnect with what's actually in your control. Your choices, your values, your daily joy. The shift. Here's your question. What if the true cost of constantly preparing for the worst is never trusting when things are good? Peace isn't found in perfect timing. It's found in clear thinking, and clear thinking begins when fear is no longer driving the conversation. You deserve to begin your mornings with more than bad news. You deserve stillness, confidence, a reason to smile. Let's step into habit 4, know one that wears the disguise of being generous, but slowly bankrupts your freedom. It's time to talk about carrying too many financial burdens for others. Habit 4. Carrying too many financial burdens for others. This one is delicate, quiet. It doesn't always show up in your bank statement, but it weighs heavy in your chest. Because sometimes, in retirement, the pressure doesn't ease. It just changes shape. Now, it's not just your children, it's your sibling who's struggling with addiction, your cousin who needs help with rent, your friend going through a divorce, maybe even your church asking for one more donation. And because you're dependable, because you've always been the strong one, you say yes. Quietly, repeatedly, even when it hurts, even when you can't quite afford to. This is the hidden habit of carrying too many financial burdens that were never yours to hold. The reason? You were raised to take care of people, to show up, to say, I've got it, even when your hands were already full, and maybe somewhere along the way, being needed became part of your identity. A source of pride. But here's what no one tells you about being the strong one. People stop checking if you're okay. They assume you're fine. You've always been fine. But deep down, maybe you're tired. Not bitter. Just tired of being the one who always fills the gap, the one who doesn't ask for help back. And yet you keep giving, because you don't want to disappoint anyone, because guilt is loud, and boundaries are hard. The impact. But here's what I see, again and again. This constant emotional and financial caretaking begins to erode your joy. You start hesitating before every purchase, not because you're unsure, but because you're waiting to see who else will need something first. Your plans stay on pause. Your dreams remain drafts. You feel pulled in 10 different directions, and your own needs are always last. And over time, the lines blur so much, you forget where your responsibilities end and someone else's begin. The solution. It's time to untangle generosity from obligation. You can love people deeply and still say, "This is as far as I can go." You can support others with wisdom instead of self-erasure. You can replace silent sacrifice with intentional giving that doesn't leave you depleted or resentful. Start by asking yourself, if I say yes to this, what am I saying no to in my own life? Then create a giving threshold. A number or boundary that lets you show up without selling out. Talk to a financial advisor about building charitable giving into your budget without sabotaging your long-term needs. And remember this, people who truly love you will respect your limits. And those who don't may have loved more what you provided than who you were. The shift. A question for your soul. If you weren't trying to save everyone else, what would you finally allow yourself to enjoy? You were not created to be everyone's lifeboat, especially not in the years meant to restore you. You have nothing left to prove. Let that be your peace. Now, let's move into habit 5, a sneaky one that often hides behind staying humble, but actually keeps you small. It's time to talk about undervaluing your time and skills. Habit 5, undervaluing your time and skills. You've spent a lifetime mastering things other people paid for, admired, or depended on. Maybe it was teaching, building, managing, caregiving. Maybe you were the go-to person everyone called when something broke or when someone broke. And now, in retirement, you still have those gifts, still sharp, still steady, still wise. But somewhere deep inside, you've started to believe the lie that retirement means irrelevance, that because no one's signing your paycheck anymore, your time doesn't have value. So when someone says, "Can you help me with this?" you do. For free, for hours, maybe even for days. You downplay your talents. You shrug and say, "Oh, it's nothing." You give away what once sustained you without even thinking twice. This is the quiet habit of undervaluing your time, your skills, your wisdom, just because you're no longer being paid for them. The reason? You were taught that value comes from productivity, that once the 9 to 5 ends, you fade into the background. And in this culture that glorifies hustle and youth, retirement can feel like a kind of invisibility cloak. So, you overcompensate. You give and give time, energy, advice, until the day disappears, and you realize you've spent it solving everyone else's problems, but your own. The impact. Here's what happens. You lose touch with your own rhythm. You stop setting boundaries. You let your days be filled by other people's urgency instead of your own intention. You say yes to things you should have paused on. You end up tired, behind, or even resentful, not because you don't want to help, but because you never pause to ask, is this how I want to spend my time now? And the longer you undervalue what you bring to the table, the more likely others are to take it for granted too. The solution. Your time is still precious, maybe now more than ever. It's okay to volunteer. It's okay to consult. It's okay to say yes, but it's also okay to charge for your wisdom, to say no, or to protect a slow morning simply because it brings you peace. Start by tracking how you spend your time over the next week. Not just what you do, but why you're doing it. Who asked? Was it necessary? Did it energize you or deplete you? Then, try this. Choose 1 hour each day that belongs to you. No favors, no guilt, just something that brings you joy, creativity, learning, or rest. Because you are not less valuable now. You are more seasoned, more centered, and more free than ever before. Don't let society's noise make you forget that. The shift. Ask yourself this. If you treated your time like treasure, how would your days look different? You've spent decades earning wisdom. Now's the time to let it serve you too, not just others. Let's move gently into habit 6 next. It's one that hides in plain sight, often disguised as being realistic, but it can keep your joy stuck in storage. We're going to talk about postponing joy for too long. Habit 6. Postponing joy for too long. Have you ever said something like, "I'll plan that trip next year. I'll buy that when the market stabilizes. Once things settle down, then I'll focus on fun." If you have, you're not alone. You've likely lived most of your life prioritizing what had to be done. And joy? Joy was often a luxury something, squeezed into the margins. Something that came after the bills were paid, the chores were done, the kids were raised. So here you are now, older, wiser, more stable, and still, joy keeps getting postponed. That's the habit. Postponing joy for so long that you forget how to receive it. The reason? For decades, you've been a planner, a provider, a protector. You've lived on schedules, calendars, alarms. You learned to delay gratification because that's how survival worked. And those skills? They got you here. They kept the lights on, the family fed, the mortgage paid. But now, that same delay reflects that instinct to push joy into the future. It's outdated. It's a protective response from a life that no longer needs protecting in the same way. The impact. Joy becomes a concept, not an experience. You find yourself in beautiful places, but thinking about the price tag. You have time to rest, but you fill it with worry. You plan for future pleasures, but never fully give yourself to the present. And over time, this pattern forms an emotional drought. People don't talk about this often, but there is such a thing as emotional dehydration, where joy becomes unfamiliar, even uncomfortable, because you've gone so long without letting yourself drink from the well. You tell yourself you'll enjoy life later, but later is always later. The solution. Let's break that cycle. Gently. Today. Joy doesn't have to be loud. It doesn't have to be expensive. It just has to be allowed. So take the trip, book the dinner, buy the thing that makes your soul sigh finally. But also light the candle. Use the good towels. Open the bottle of wine you've been saving for a special occasion. Because here's the secret. You are the special occasion. Start small. One act of unapologetic joy each week. And watch how it softens your soul. Watch how your body remembers what it feels like to laugh. Not because you earned it, but because you exist. You've done the work. You've proven enough. Now, let delight in. The shift. Ask yourself this. If joy knocked on your door today, would you open it or ask it to come back tomorrow? This moment, this quiet, ordinary breath is sacred. Don't keep pushing joy into the future while life passes in the now. Next, let's move into habit 7, the final and perhaps most invisible habit. One that masquerades as humility, but quietly chokes your confidence. It's time we talk about believing you're too old to grow financially. Habit 7. Believing you're too old to grow financially. There's a quiet myth floating around in retirement circles. It doesn't shout, but it lingers. And if you've heard it enough times, you might have started to believe it too. It says, "At my age, it's too late to change financially. What I have is what I have. I'll just ride it out." It sounds humble, harmless, even practical. But in truth, believing you're too old to grow financially is a silent surrender, one that can quietly rob you of possibility and peace. The reason? You've lived through 1,000 shifting tides markets, rising and crashing, careers evolving, responsibilities stacking. So when you reach retirement, it's natural to think, I'm done adapting. This is the hand I've been dealt. And let's be honest, it's exhausting to always be the one adjusting. So you pull back. You stop exploring new financial tools. You avoid learning about digital banking or passive income. You keep your accounts exactly where they've always been, not because it's best, but because it feels safe. And maybe part of you believes financial growth is for the young, for the 30-year-olds with side hustles and time to recover from mistakes. But here's what I want you to hear clearly. Growth has no age limit. And wisdom is the greatest financial asset you have. The impact. When you stop believing you can grow, you settle. You stay in outdated investments. You overpay for services. You miss out on new options simply because they're unfamiliar. You give up your seat at the table of learning and with it, your power. Over time, this resignation becomes self-fulfilling. Not because you're incapable, but because you've stopped expecting expansion. And worse, this mindset often bleeds into more than money. You stop dreaming. You stop asking, what's next? The solution. Reframe retirement not as the closing chapter but as a new financial season. Start simple. Revisit your accounts with a trusted advisor. Ask questions you were once too embarrassed to ask. Explore safer, smarter options for growth even if they're modest. Learn about tools that protect your assets, lower your taxes, or generate passive income. Take a class. Watch a webinar. Read one new financial article each week, not because you're chasing wealth, but because you're honoring stewardship. And, most importantly, start seeing yourself as a financial learner again. Because the world isn't waiting for you to be an expert, it's waiting for you to stay curious. The shift. Ask yourself, what would change if I believed that my financial wisdom is still in motion, not finished, but unfolding? You are not too old to learn. You are not too late to evolve. You are not finished building a life of dignity, clarity, and quiet abundance. You're just getting started only now. You're doing it with eyes wide open. Now let's take a deep breath and begin to wrap all of this together. So here we are. We've walked through 7 habits, quiet ones, sneaky ones, the kind that don't show up with flashing lights or sirens. The kind that sit quietly in the corners of your daily life, shaping the way you spend, give, protect, or postpone. And maybe, as you listened, you saw yourself in one of them, or all of them. Maybe you felt a twinge of truth, or a wave of emotion you didn't expect. That's not failure, that's awareness. And awareness is the beginning of freedom. Because here's the beauty of where you are in life. You have the time to pivot, the wisdom to choose, and the freedom to begin again without shame, without apology. Your retirement was never meant to be a slow fade. It was meant to be a reawakening, a return to what matters, a quieter kind of richness. And every habit you shed creates more space for joy, for ease, for peace. So take what speaks to you and leave the rest. You're not behind. You're exactly where you need to be. Before you go, I'd love to hear from you. What spoke to you most today? Was there a habit you recognized in your own life? Or maybe a moment that stirred something inside you? Share your thoughts in the comments. I read each one. You never know who else you might inspire just by opening your heart. And if this message offered you peace or clarity, consider giving the video a like. It helps others just like you find their way to this space of wisdom. And don't forget to subscribe to Wisdom Way Insight for more calm, honest, soul-nourishing content designed for this sacred chapter of life. Because here, we don't see retirement as the end of the story. We see it as a turning point, a reclamation, a return to what truly matters. So, I'll leave you with this. What if aging isn't about losing time, but finally, having time to live the way your soul was always meant to? Take that question with you today and let it guide your next beautiful step.